Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar on how to teach and assess listening. I'd like to just ask you all to please mute yourselves so that we don't have any feedback or background noise so everyone can hear well. I'd also love it if you were able to just tell us where you're joining us from. What's your name? What do you teach? What state are you in? And you can feel free to share these comments and questions throughout the webinar in the chat box. I have a first introductory question for you, and that is, do your states test listening? You probably know that the SBAC has a portion of listening tested, but many states with state standards around listening also test it. So I'd be curious to hear in the chat box whether or not your school or state tests listening. So welcome, everyone. My name is Monica Brady-Myerov. I'm the founder and CEO of Listenwise, which is bringing the power of listening to the classroom with real-world audio stories that connect to your curriculum. Listenwise is the only listening comprehension program in the market, and we've teamed up with experts to create a way to assess and track listening. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this webinar. But first, I want to extend an offer to all of you for joining. As a thank you, you can experience Listenwise Premium through August 2017. The way you're going to do that is you're going to sign up for a free account on Listenwise. We're a free resource for teachers, and we have premium features for schools and districts. So sign up at listenwise.com as a free user. Then you're going to want to click on Join School and put in this code right here from the webinar, that this code will give you access to premium for the rest of the school year. I'll revisit this at the end of the webinar in case you're joining late or miss it at this moment. But first of all, a quiz. So if you look at the quote at the top of the page, it just says it all. Children who are better listeners are also better learners. There's a lot of studies around this, and it's so true. And it's true because of some of these statistics I'm going to share with you. But first, I want to ask you, how much of what we learn is learned by listening? What's your percentage quote? I'm going to fill it in right here in a moment. But first, I want to see what you're saying in the chat box if you want to take a guess at how much of what we learn is learned by listening, because I think you're going to be surprised. The other blank I'm going to fill in a moment is the next question, which is, how much does listening increase student motivation? So the first question is, how much do we learn of what we learn is learned by listening? 20%, 50%, 80%? What do you think? And the other one is, how much does listening increase student motivation? Claire says 20%. I'm going to go ahead and share the answer here. The first one is 85% of what we learn by listening. I mean, think about it. When kids go to school, they know how to listen. They don't know how to read, write, do arithmetic. That's why they go to school. Our lives begin with listening. Even before we're born, we're listening. And it's the building blocks of all learning. In addition, it's a huge motivator. So I'm going to just show you, I think we have a guest there, that listening motivation is critical. She thinks 50%. You're close, Nancy Jo. It increases motivation by 67%. The other statistic I just want to point out here is that combining print and audio increases recall over print 40% over print alone. And I'll show you some resources that can help do that, but this is just a great resource using listening as a way to increase reading and engagement and all these things I'm going to be talking about today. So first of all, why do we love to listen to stories so much? Well, research shows it's because listening requires more from your brain. After all, when you're listening to a story rather than reading it, you must process the information at the same rate as it's being presented. And that's hard, and your brain is making a movie of this information. So listening comprehension is a complex construct that's dependent on numerous cognitive and linguistic processes. But in the K-12 classroom, listening is a skill that's rarely taught. And until recently, there hasn't been a way online to assess listening and track listening. Well, that's what we do at Listenwise. We have a library of fact-checked, compelling, real-world NPR stories and public radio stories and podcasts to engage students. And we have them in current events, English language arts, science, and social studies. So the audio stories have lessons that are aligned to your state standards that help students work on their critical listening skills. And I don't know if you realize, but listening is a part of the National Common Core Skills requirement standards. It's also in many state standards. And as I said earlier, it's tested in the SBAC, the Smarter Balance test, not always in the park, but it's also tested in some state level tests like in Florida. So I'm going to show you how, just briefly, I'm going to pop over to listenwise.com to just show you a little bit about what we offer to help you build listening skills and assess listening skills. This shows you just our front page panel of all of the different stories that we've pulled from public radio and podcasts to connect to what you're teaching. So let's say you're teaching dystopian fiction. That's a common theme in high school, I know, having a high schooler myself. So if you look here, there are a couple of examples. You can also refine your search here. And I'm actually going to refine it because I want to show you a listening quiz really quickly. And we're going to get more into how we created these quizzes and what they assess. But I first wanted to just show you what it looks like and what it can do for your students. So I'm just going to log in quickly. This is what you'll be able to do as a premium member until the end of August. I'll be giving that code at the end of the webinar again. So if you joined late, don't worry, you will get your code for how to experience premium for free for the rest until the end of August. So here's a story. It's a public radio story that is about Hunger Games and reality. It's about protests in Hong Kong using some of the symbols taken from the Hunger Games story. So it's a real world curriculum connection. And I'm just going to play you a little bit of it so you can get a sense of the story and also see some of the listening supports we offer.
It's becoming a new Thanksgiving tradition. This year, like the year before, the newest installment of the Hunger Games movie franchise, Mockingjay Part 1.
So as you can see, this interactive transcript is a great support for reading and literacy and also for English language learners. But what I want to show you over here, we're going to go into deeper in a minute, is how you can assign a quiz. You can take this story and automatically send it out to all of your students with or without a transcript, and they will have this quiz populate their Listenwise account. They'll be able to listen and read the transcript or not if you'd like, and screen through the 5 questions in our quiz. So just wanted to give you a quick view of what the quiz looks like and how easy it is to assign and find, and show you that it's part of this broader lesson that we have around the content of the public radio story and how it relates to your curriculum, but then also building listening supports, which I encourage you all to take the time to familiarize yourself with all of the supports we offer, including tiered vocabulary, worksheet organizers, additional listening guides. We'll get into that a little bit more in the presentation. So I want to pop back though here to my PowerPoint to talk about how we can help improve listening. So teaching resources enhance listening instruction. So you cannot just expect your students to become better listeners. In fact, when I started Listenwise 4 years ago, I came from the world of public radio. I was not an educator, but I was a public radio reporter. And I met many teachers who said to me, "What? You're bringing public radio into the classroom, but my students can't listen." And I always would say, "Well, have you given them something good to listen to, an interesting thing to listen, and guided them in their listening?" And they said, "Oh, interesting. So maybe we will try this." And what we help do to improve listening is first give students a range of complexity. So students can practice listening to nonfiction audio stories with a range of complexity. We have not Lexile leveled the scripts because the reality is students can listen 2 to 3 grade levels higher than they can read. And I'll probably repeat that later because it's one of my favorite statistics. But we don't want teachers to limit students' abilities by seeing a Lexile level and saying, "Oh, my students can't understand that." But what we do is provide a listening challenge level of low, medium, and high that gives you an idea of the level of vocabulary and the complexity of the sentences, so you can make a judgment on a particular story for students. Second, the depth of understanding. What Listenwise does is help students acquire content knowledge and language skills by listening and completing assignments that require multiple levels of cognitive effort. So these range from understanding specific details to analyzing purpose and reason. Listenwise stories target a wide variety of topics across content areas, which gives students repeated exposure to unknown words and context. And I see we have a question. I encourage you to put your questions in the chat box from Melinda, who asks, can you differentiate when you send out the listening quizzes? And I think this is a good point to say, yes, you can differentiate with the quizzes by choosing to give the transcript or not. The questions themselves are static, but the differentiation lies in whether or not you give the students the ability to read the transcript as well as listen, and then refer back to the transcript, and slow down the audio. So the other way that Listenwise improves listening is helping students do close listening. You're probably familiar with the concept of close reading. It's a very common way to deconstruct texts. Well, we have created a system around close listening that guides teachers through helping students listen to a story multiple times, with telling students to focus on different listening goals and practice their listening comprehension. So these successive listens allow teachers to hone students' understanding of language and content. And finally, how does it improve listening? Well, it's just practice. It's stamina and focus. Students haven't done this before. They have rarely been asked to be good critical listeners. So students can build stamina and focus to increase their listening comprehension. As they're expected to master increasingly complex content, they need to become better listeners. Studies show better listeners are better learners. So it's yet another reason to focus on these important skills. Another reason is 23 major studies have found correlations between reading and listening. In general, the poor reader is also likely to be the poor listener. Listening is the building block of literacy, as this chart demonstrates. So reading comprehension involves both decoding print and understanding language. But once students can decode text, their comprehension is dependent on understanding language. But students who have not mastered decoding can still learn language skills by listening to stories and content read aloud. So students can listen on a higher language level than they can read. That's that statistic again, 2 to 3 grade levels higher. So listening provides a way to improve students' language skills, and that makes complex ideas more accessible to students. A good example is students may be able to listen to and understand the plot and character development of Don Quixote and his inner journey if it's being read aloud, but not be able to decode enough words on their own to make sense of the content if they were reading it. So once your students are listening, how do you know if they're really comprehending what they're hearing? Well, just like reading, listening has many different aspects. You may have a student who can answer literal recall questions, but can't really identify the main idea. Or perhaps you'll discover a student isn't able to make inferences when listening. But how would you discover that without the right assessments? Despite the fact that listening is part of the Common Core and many state standards, there hasn't been a way to assess and track listening skills until now. We made it a priority in our company to create, with a team of experts, a listening quiz that measures 8 strands of listening. You see them here on the right. Literal, main idea, vocabulary, that you can look at them on the right and see these are the strands that have been identified by a team of experts as being key to being good listeners. And that's what our quizzes are teaching. This is just an example of a quiz on the left. We saw that previously when we were looking at the site live. And as I said before, you can't differentiate the question itself, but you can choose to give students the transcript along with the slowed audio. So my suggestion is that when you're just starting out and practicing, that is a good way to get students trained and understanding how to really focus their listening. There are many types of listening. And if you look at this list, you think about how we use discriminative listening all the time. You're thinking, oh, is that a bird outside my window? Or if you're precise listening, you're looking for finding details. This is like what a detective may do when interviewing a witness, trying to have them retell the story and sequence it out. Then there's strategic listening. This is something that also we frequently do when let's say you're being called into a meeting with your boss and you need to come out and understand what the main idea is and what you're being asked to do. And then also critical listening. You do this a lot if you're looking at media literacy and trying to analyze what you're listening to and determine what's the fact, what's the opinion. Then, of course, appreciative listening is just listening to good music and theater and all the things you love. What we work on is precise listening, strategic listening, and critical listening skills. So how do we decide the 8 key components of listening that we wanted to track and assess? Well, with this team of experts, including a cognitive scientist from Massachusetts General Hospital, we identified elements that are seen in reading assessments because we know the important connection between reading and listening. While listening and reading are both comprehension skills, the kinds of natural speech found in these audio stories is not organized as a well-written essay with a topic sentence or a linear progression of ideas. So students need to practice identifying and summarizing the most important ideas in the audio. So when students are listening to a speaker's voice, they can also pay attention to the tone, the emphasis, the pacing of the speech to make inferences and identify the speaker's point of view. So most of these are self-explanatory, and they're things, as I said, that you'll typically see in a reading assignment or reading assessment. Here's some closer up example of one of these listening quiz questions. This gets at the critical listening skill and assesses the strand of point of view. So students listen to and identify and evaluate the speaker's point of view and why he or she is sharing this information. So this question here speaks to the Common Core standard of in ELA literacy, SL.6.3, delineate a speaker's argument and specific claims. It also addresses the SBAC standard that the student will identify, interpret, or analyze the point of view. So you can see that here. And when the student completes the 5-question quiz at the end, they're presented with their score right away. If they got 1 out of 5 or 5 out of 5, and they can see the correct answer right there. So how students perform, well, the other thing that will happen is you as the teacher get an immediate report, which I'm going to show you in just a moment, and that will inform your feedback, your instruction, and let me show you how we provide that data. So this is a class level report from a listening quiz. You can see right away that your class has a weakness, primarily in main idea and inferencing. So you can use the data to know what to teach. And our reporting also gives you visibility on the individual student level, so you can teach skills that the students need. So you could click on the name of the student, whoops, except I'm not live on the site, and you can drill down and see how Tom Krauth has done over the series of quizzes that you've given, and also track his progress over time. So we have reporting on the student level, the class level, and then we also have an admin level access that allows them to see how the whole school is doing, improving their listening skills. So now that you're armed with the data, how do you teach listening? So this is just a step-by-step way to do it. First, you want to set the purpose. Students need to understand the purpose for listening to get the most out of the experience. They need to listen for rather than to. So having an explicit purpose in mind will help them know where to focus and enable them to achieve success. Do they need to listen to determine which statements are fact and opinion? Or do they need to understand the procedure for carrying out a specific activity? In either case, letting students know upfront will make their accomplishment more likely. So when you look at Listenwise, you'll see we always have a list of listening discussion questions. Those are some guides you can use to choose what is the purpose, and maybe you want to write down one of the questions on the board or hand it out or just tell them to keep it in their minds while they're listening. Next, you want to set the stage. So getting ready to listen is like getting in the zone or warming up. You just want to warn them. You want to try to be in a quiet place, shut the door to your classroom, maybe dim the lights, sitting in an appropriate place. You can tell students to either close their Chromebooks or put their heads on their desk, take notes, don't take notes, just helping them understand what the setting is and how they should behave will ensure success. So after the listening, you want to point out the importance of providing the time for follow-up. So immediately after they've listened, hold them accountable for whatever it was that they were attending to while listening. Many times this follow-up will be in a written format. So there's a paper trail. But what I've also seen is teachers have students share out pieces of the story that they heard. And each student needs to share out something different than the other student. So as the class goes around and around, if you're the last one to speak, you better come up with a very obscure detail from the story because all the other details have been given. The other point is keep it brief. The listening stories on Listenwise are between 3 and 5 minutes. We know from research this is a typical attention span period of a middle and high schooler. So choosing listening segments, and we help you do this obviously, but keeping in mind that the shorter it is, the with a clear, direct purpose, the more successful it will be. Also integrate it into your instruction. I don't want to encourage you to have listening Fridays where you choose to listen to something that's not related to what you're teaching, but just practicing listening. That is not going to be as well received, and the research shows that it is better done when it's well integrated into your curriculum. You also need to be the model, showing students what you're doing, how you're doing it, sharing your experiences out from it. And then finally, avoid repeating yourself or your students' responses. So once they've listened and given you the response, don't belabor the point. You've heard it. That's modeling good behavior. I mean, it's modeling, not good behavior, good listening. So it's fine to just try to avoid repeating yourself. Now on Listenwise, we are working right now on adding more comprehensive listening plans that will help you teach listening skills. So I'm going to walk through one right now. This is about teaching students to evaluate reasoning. So and the type we're going to focus on is critical listening. And the story you see here is just a snapshot from the website. It's a story about bee deaths and crop consequences and how this mysterious disease that's killing a lot of honeybees has had an effect on farmers. So to start, teach students to listen critically for specific information that will inform their particular problem and solution and highlight the reasoning behind it. So for example, in this story about bee deaths, students think about why the honeybee colonies have declined. And they can listen to the story, take notes on multiple causes for the problem, and also the possible solutions. So step-by-step instruction would go something like selecting the story that poses a problem and telling the students, today you're going to be listening to an audio story that poses a problem. Then you're going to evaluate the reasoning that led to the claims and solutions presented in the audio. Next, you present the purpose of the lesson. This purpose is to use information from the audio story to find support for their reasoning about problems and solutions posed in the audio. Next, you're going to play the audio, providing time for students to discuss the audio after they've heard it and identifying the main assumptions, claims that are made, and maybe even playing it again. There's no harm in that. Next, you're going to ask students to find evidence to support the claims that were made and connect them to their own ideas. So knowing how the claims are organized can help break the problem apart and have them respond to it. So that in the end, the students will have met this objective of demonstrating their ability to listen critically by identifying information that helps evaluate the reasoning behind a problem and solution. So I hope at this point of the webinar, you're like, wow, I really want to try this. I got to try a listening quiz myself. Well, I am assuming you're all teachers, and I know many of you confirm that in the chat box, but I wanted to give you a way for you to test your own listening by going to listenwise.com/listening_test. And you're going to call up the story called Cooking Up a Super Volcano. And this is just a fun way for you to practice and understand what it means like without, what it means to listen to a 2.5-minute story and see how much you can recall. Do you know the best meaning of the words? Can you infer? How is your detail recall? So I challenge you all to take the listening challenge. Now, if you have questions, we're coming to the end of the prepared statements in the webinar, and I'm happy to answer them. So I'm next just going to go to one more time back to that original graph because I think it's so important to look at how important listening is in increasing test scores, in helping students listen and comprehend 2 grade levels above their reading level. This is just some great statistics. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to end on the reminder that this is how you can get your premium code for free use of Listenwise premium trial until the end of August. You're going to go to listenwise.com, sign up as a free teacher, and input this code, and you will be off to the races. We'd love to hear from you. Connect with me at monica@listenwise.com or tweet us out. Let everybody know what you learned in this listening webinar, what a great listener you were, and how you're ready to start teaching your students to be better listeners and helping them assess and assess their listening and track it over time. I see one last question here from Sue, who asks about elementary school. Yeah, Sue, all of our stories are kid safe, I'll say that much. And what we've done is categorize some of the elementary type stories with the term or the tag elementary. So in the search box, type in elementary, and you're going to come up with a list of stories that will engage your elementary age students. They can absolutely listen to these stories. It is not going to be too difficult for them to get the main concept and ideas. Our lessons and our resources are designed more for middle and high school, and our standards alignment are for middle and high school, but that doesn't mean you can share these, that you can't share these, that you can't share these over time with your elementary school students. So we have a question from Bill Keeney about how we demonstrated that our program increases listening comprehension. So Bill, we are in the very beginnings of doing that. Because there has not been a standardized listening test that we can benchmark against, we first created this test, and we're working with West Ed, which is a very well-respected research group out in California, to do some preliminary classroom testing around demonstrating that this program can increase listening comprehension. Because you make a very good point, and until now there has not been a way to demonstrate improved listening over time. So we're working on it. We know we have a long way to go, and we'd love you to use these listening quizzes, give us your feedback, and I thank you all for attending this webinar. Happy listening.